Howdy folks, Little John out in the brewery. Today I'm going to do a video on the process of using the Brewzilla. I'm knocking up a all grain rice lager today, but I'm not going to focus on the beer. I'm going to focus on the actual equipment and how to get the best out of it and what you need to do when you're doing a brew on the Brewzilla. So before we get into that, I want to say thank you to all the Patreons of Little John. As always, cheers guys, great to have you along, and thanks for the support. If you're interested in Patreon, hit the link down the bottom, find out what it's all about. It's a few extra benefits, and gives a little bit back to Little John to make sure we can keep doing, you know, experiments and trials and playing around and stuff, so everybody can learn a little bit. If you're not a subscriber to Little John's channel, hit the button down there in the corner, ring the bell, you get notified when everything's on, you won't miss a single thing. So as I said, brew day today. Normally brew day means it's a video and it's about the recipe and the grains and the hops and the yeast I'm using and what I'm doing to make that brew work, with some shots of the equipment along the way. I have been asked a few different people over time, obviously for tips and things on the Brewzilla, or the Robo Brew. I actually have a Robo Brew. I haven't got the current model, which after I bought mine, the next model out was changed up from the Robo Brew 3.0 to the Brewzilla 3.11. Sorry, I got the 3.1, went to 3.11, and they upgraded, put a different, slightly different screen into them, but essentially it's the same machine. It works the same, it's all got the same components, it sets up exactly the same, and we'll see that as we go through. And people have asked me, have I got details on how to really use it? And no, I don't. So today I'm going to follow the brew day, but I'm going to be looking at solely at the equipment. There'll be a little bit touching on ingredients, but again more so from the angle of how they work with the Brewzilla and with the machine, and how your recipe is going to work through your day. So that's where we're going. So if you, obviously if you're using one and you're using it all the time and you've got yourself under control, this isn't going to be maybe a hell of a lot of interest. Maybe you'll pick up a tip or two along the way. I certainly am not the world's biggest expert on the Brewzilla. I've done now, off the top of my head, probably, I don't know, maybe 15 to 20 brews. Yeah, probably 20, maybe a few more brews on the Brewzilla, and everything ranging from full batches to reiterated matches for an RIS, right down to small, 12 litre batches. Today I'm going to be doing a 21 litre batch, so close to full volume, so we can see exactly how all these bits and pieces work. So I'm going to grab the gear out and we'll have a look. Rightio. So this is my Robo Brew. It says Robo Brew on the front. That's a good giveaway about what it is. Obviously the Brewzilla says Brewzilla on the front. That's a good way of knowing the difference between one and the other. The other thing is, Robo Brew's got a little robot on here. On the screen he does a bit of a dance when you're cooking. You might see it a bit later. The Robo Brew has a fucking like a Godzilla, Godzilla, little creature in the window. So, but basically, it's just a big, looks like a big urn. You tap on here, pipe for your pump. Now you pump the pump switch there, which comes to the top. There's an arm that goes on that, which you'll see as we go along. Control for the pump on there, the valve, So you can switch it on and off, so you don't have to have the pump on. Control panel, and again we'll look at this closely in just a minute and see exactly how that works, and that'll be our starting point. That's where we're going to start off any brew. Control panel, and then get on to the rest. We've got two switches around the side here. These are the elements. There's two elements in the Brewzilla, a 1900 and a 500. So you've got 2400 watts of total power, and you can switch them on and off as you want. So you can see as we go how you can use these as you're going through your process. You know, ignore this isn't exactly as clean as it could be. I obviously haven't cleaned it real well after the last brew, but the outside's a bit inconsequential. It's the inside that really matters, and it's clean. So straight look inside, she's just, like I said, just a big urn. It's just hollow through. Concealed elements down the bottom. Obviously have the power cord hanging off it. Now on the bottom, on the new Brewzilla, this bottom plate will have a couple of legs on it, which allows it just a little bit more clearance for airflow. There was some issues with older models, and even this model, where there wasn't enough airflow and these boards were melting, or the circuitry was getting too hot and they were cooking. I always sit this fella on a milk crate when I'm brewing, and you find most guys do the same thing. Even with the legs, I think getting that extra elevation, allowing plenty of airflow. There's vents around the sides, but not a real lot. And if you've got a full brew going, this is running for a good 4 or 5 hours sometimes. So you need that airflow, and you'll see that again as we're going through up on the milk crate. Excuse the scratchy throat, coming off a cold. So this is our vessel for holding our water. So essentially, initially it's a mash tun. It's a mash tun that becomes a boil kettle. That's why it's called a simple, a 1V, normally one system. So to get from water in here to beer, we need to be able to put the grain in. So this is where the other bits and pieces come in. Now, you have a fourth bottom, which is just a perforated plate. It's got a couple of legs on the bottom there. It does come with a little hook, which throws some people off when they first get it, because none of this stuff comes together. The hook's not actually on. It's in a little bag, and you've got to put it in yourself, and it confuses some people as to what the hell it is. But that just sits inside. Nice and easy. And that stops a lot of stuff from getting through to the bottom, and you'll understand that will become a bit more obvious what it's for as we go through. So to go inside that, and that protects it, so that sits up, keeps everything off the element on the bottom. Now in that we have to have, to create this into a mash tun, we need something to hold the grain, or the malt. Hence this fella, this is called the Malt Pipe. So it's just a big cylinder. It's got a couple of little legs on the bottom, and what they do is they sit onto here. There's a little ring around the outside. You'll see that a bit clearer later. Which this sits on when it's sitting in top, but normally it sits inside. This goes, which you can't see. Pointless even trying to show that. So mash tun. So to make the mash tun, I'll turn this into the malt pipe. You have a couple of screens. So you have this one, which is the bottom screen, not to be confused with the bottom plate. Okay, and again it's just perforated stainless. It's fairly solid. It's got a threaded hole in the bottom and a rod that goes in there. Now this is a hollow rod, and that just screws in the bottom, and that just sits inside your malt pipe, and A, plugs the bottom, catches the grain from going through, but also because it's perforated allows water to circulate. Again, which is part of what we're doing. We're recirculating as we're mashing as we go through. Now, when you do get your first kit, you get this fella, which is a very light mesh screen. And that's designed to go on top of that bottom plate. Now you'll find that most brewers tend to lose this fairly quickly. Because it's designed to cause some resistance of the flow through the grain bed, so you get a nice slow recirculation of water, and also a slow drain when you're sparging. Most brewers tend to find that this can cause issues with the mash being stuck, so quite often they won't use it. I've lasted about 2 mashes on mine and I never used it again. But if you do use it, it goes in now and sits over. So I'll just pretend we're in the malt pipe, and that sits over the top. And then you can just assemble the rest. This is just an extension pipe that goes in. It's got the little grabby bits on it so you can move it up and down. And initially you just want it on there. And that sits inside your malt pipe again. So you can see it gives you some height, and that will become obvious shortly when we're mashing in what that's for. Okay, there are a few other pieces here which I'll just quickly go through. I'm not going to put them together. Another fairly solid perforated screen, and that's your top screen, and that goes on top of your mash, on top of your grain. You get a little black plug which sits on there when you're adding your grain, and again you'll see shortly why that's there. And you also have this fella, just a little cone, which is an overflow cane, which sits on there. And it just gives you a little bit extra height on this pipe, and allows for Wart to recirculate back down the middle if it becomes an issue. And again, I'll describe that a little bit further when we're actually mashing in, or when we've actually got the mash underway. And you get a handle like so, which goes into there's 2 holes in the top of the malt pipe, and that goes in there, and that's your handle, so you can actually lift your malt pipe when you need to. It pops in and out. Okay, so that's the overview on the machine, the bits and pieces that go with it. That's it, pump in there, got your outlet tap, and we'll discuss them a bit further on. So I'll swap the camera over and we'll have a look, at the get some power on, and we'll have a look through the screen and how that sets up. Okay, so now we're looking at the control panel. I'm just going to show you what it can do and how you can use it. Now it has 2 settings. It has an auto and a manual setting. Now currently it's on auto. We can swap the button here. There's an auto manual button. Also, power's there. So you can turn the power off independently of the power supply. At the moment, you can see here is the pause symbol. If I turn that on, that'll go to play, and you'll see the little robo. Notice that on the Brewzilla, that's actually a little Godzilla. Right, now I won't leave that running because I've got no water in there, so I don't want the element running with nothing in there. So your basic display shows you what temperature the sensor's reading, and the sensor's in the bottom of the unit, and the setting that you currently got it set at. So currently it's set at 106. So if I was to run this, it will heat up until it gets to 106 degrees and then turn off. Because it won't get to 106 degrees, this will just continue to boil. So when you go into a boil, you just go to a mark well above 100. So it just continues boils without stopping. Yeah, this was last used for for my still. Now, so this will change as your temperature rises. So when you're using it manually, you just, when it's paused, you just hit temperature, hold the plus and minus keys, and it will take it down to whatever temperature you want. So if you're going for your, you're doing a mash you're doing the mash, you might go for 65 degrees. And you set it at that, and you just press play, and it will go and it will heat up. The elements will kick on depending on which ones you got turned on, and it will heat up till it gets to 65, and it will maintain that temperature. But what the best part of the control deck is being able to use it in a completely automated mode. So we switch to auto, and then what you'll get is, and it's hard to, you can just see it, it's always tucked up on the bottom here, there's 6 steps. So it says S1, and this is your first step. So what you can do then is you can set your temperature that you want it to be at, and I want it to be at 50. I want 54. I'm going to set this up for today's mash. So I'm temp at 54, and I can set my time. Now that's the amount of time that I want it to be at 54 degrees. Now, so I want to do a mash in at 54. Oh, I've missed it. Let's do it again. I just want to do a short 54 for 10 minutes, just a short protein rest. So enter time again, and it's set to go. Should be, here we go. Okay, now my next step, I can go to a step 2, and you can see it's now got S2 on there, and it's changed now to 76 degrees. That's what it was last set up, but I don't want 76. So we'll go down and we'll change that. I want that at 63. And I want that to be there for 40 minutes. So I'll crank this to 40. Now, and you get that happens, which you got to watch. It will jump into a fast forward sort of a mode. So that can be a little bit fiddly at times, getting just where you want. It sort of goes for about 40 minutes and then we'll jump up. So you've got to sort of, so you've just jumped on error. So you just got to be careful. Play around with where you want to go. 40 minutes. Okay. Now, this is where some people have a bit of an issue with this timer and the settings, is that timer will start. From the moment it jumps from 54 on step 1 to 63 on step 2, that 40-minute timer will start. Now, look, there's a lot of people that think that timer shouldn't start until it gets to the next temp level, but it doesn't. This is how it runs, so you need to allow for it. So technically, what I find is that with both elements running, with the 1900 and the 500, so you're running full power, it will ramp up a degree about every 50 seconds. That's on my conditions, so it varies from person to person. So I know to go from 54 degrees to 63 degrees is going to take me about 7 to 8 minutes. So I allow for that. So I know I'm still going to get 30 or 32 minutes of mash at my 63 degrees. I'm happy with that. That's really what I want. So I'll leave it with that. Step 3, I don't want to go to 110. Oh, got me time. That's all right. I'll make that 20. And the temperature, I want to bring down to 68. So I'm doing a protein rest at 54, a nice fermentability rest at 62 to really convert most of the sugars. 68 just to sort of give that a bit of a finish off, and more just to bring it through the upper temps. And then step 4, which will be mash out, and I'll bring this up to 72 degrees. I'm going to bring it to 74, and that's just because of temperature discrepancies, and we'll have a bit of a look at that as we go through as well. But 74 there, and I don't want it for 5 hours. I want that for 20 minutes as well. Now, actually, I'll go back to the other step because I've missed it. I should have been 30 minutes. So that's 20 times done. So I go back now. Step 5, I'm not really worried about. It's set at 130 at 90 now. That's fine. So basically, once I've gone through the mash out, it will automatically start to go to a boil. And step 6 is just irrelevant completely. So back to step 3. And I want to change that time to half an hour because I want to have it close to 20 minutes at that temp. Okay, so that's set and ready to go. So take it back to step 1. So when I start it now, so that's for today's mash. So it'll automatically go through, and the timer here will count down. It will count how much time has gone as we go through, so you'll know how long before the next step, and we'll have a look at that changing as we're going through the mash. Yeah, just one quick thing while I've got this here, and one thing that works really well if you want to save yourself some time, you want to get a mash on without too much effort. What I like to do the night before, you can get your Brewzilla, your Robo Brew, get your mash water in, and you can set this first step, and you can basically just set it at whatever your I don't know why this is telling me about 33 degrees, so I certainly haven't got 33 degrees in there, but you can set this just at room temperature. You can even set your temperature to say 15 degrees and set your timer so it will start, say, the next morning. So for 9 o'clock at night, if I want to put a mash on at 6:30 in the morning, I can set this first step at 15 degrees for 9 hours and then set my second step at my mashing temp. So it's basically 6 o'clock in the morning. This will switch on. It will start to warm up to my mashing. I can come out at 6:30. It's ready to go. Basically, just it's ready to mash in, throw the grains in, and off I go. Saves mucking around having to wait for it. But yeah, not something you have to do, but it's certainly a handy little feature. If you don't mind using it and want to get a brew done, first thing in the morning. So that's the control panel. Let's go. Let's get this the water in and start getting the brew happening. Okay, so this is the recipe for today. You can see the strike water is 16.2 litres, and so we've got markings there, and it's exactly where we're sitting at. So I want to bring this up to mashing temp. So I'll switch to manual, set the 54, I press play, and you'll see both elements will switch on and it will start to heat up, and our little Robo Brew starts to do a dance. I think the Brewzilla will do the same sort of thing. Okay, so the unit's now set. We've got our mash water in, and it's going to bring up to that 54 degrees that we've set as our mash in. Now, when we get to that, I'll switch to the auto mode and then go from there. So while that's happening, we'll get our grains organised and get them ready to go in. So before I do that, just a quick chat about the grain bill and the volume that you need strike water in the Brewzilla or the Robo Brew. It works a little bit different to, say, a 3V. and definitely different to a standard brew in a bag. You know, if you're coming from brew in a bag, then yeah, you're probably used to doing more full volume mashing, where with the Brewzilla you're coming back to a traditional mash and sparge, which is generally around 50-50 of the actual water volume that you require. Varies a bit by recipe, but that's sort of, it splits the water into two different batches. So, but what we need to allow for in the Brewzilla is that below that malt pipe, which is going to hold our grain, this fella, our grain's going to go in that, and we're going to drop that into the water, into our water. But below this, under that bottom plate, is dead space, where this does not actually, when it's just water, or will become wort, just sitting below it and not actually in that grain. Now, to allow for that volume-wise, to make sure all the grain that's in this pipe is wet and underwater and constantly in contact during the mashing process, we need to allow for that space. Now, on a traditional system, you don't, because your grain just sits right on the bottom of your mash tun, and you don't have any. There's no dead space in that part of your system. In the Brewzilla, you've got to allow for it. So, depending on what calculations you're using, you'll see it allowed for. And quite often, it will be a standard water to grain ratio of 3:1. Which is fairly standard for any sort of mash, and then adding around 4.5 litres to that volume to get your mash in. So, as an example, on this mash today, I've got 4 kilos of grain, or fractured over 4 kilos. So on a standard mash, you would have 3 litres of water for each kilo, so you'd have 12 litres of water, and then you'd allow 4.5 litres for your dead space, which gets you 16.5. Now, I haven't particularly allowed for it directly in this recipe. I've just allowed straight 4 litres per kilogram, which gets me to 16.2. So I'm very close anyway. That's going to work. That's going to work quite nice. And then that leaves us our Sparge Water, which is the remainder of our water, which in this case is about 14 1/3 litres. So we've got a total of 30.5 litres on the mash and sparge combined to get us back to our 21 litres in the fermenter at the end of the day. And we'll talk about the numbers that get us there along the way, but that's your mash number. 3 kilos per 3 litres of water per kilo of grain, plus 4.5 kilos to allow for your dead space. It's going to get you in a nice spot. And this is where your limitation can come in. You could just start going into a big grain bill. So you do say a 6 kilo grain bill, you're talking, you know, 22.5 litres of water. You start pushing with the grain, it starts getting hard to contain it in this system. So there are limitations on the amount of grain you can use in the Brewzilla. And there's plenty of people who will discuss exactly what that is. I've seen people push it up to 7 kilos with a very thick mash and a long sparge. But for me, ideally 6 kilos is probably about as far as you want to push it. And that will knock you out some fairly big beers. You can certainly knocking out IPAs, even double IPAs at that sort of grain bill. Sometimes you just need to look at knocking down your actual volume, your output. Instead of trying to get a 21 litre batch, maybe look to get a 16 or an 18 litre batch of those bigger beers so you can allow for getting the grain in there. But that's for you to experiment and play around with. At the moment we're sticking for a standard easy mash, which you brew, you're talking 4.5, 5.5 kilos of grain, no problem at all. Rightio. So I'm going to get some water chemicals in here quickly. Just minor, just for adjustments for this brew, and then I'm going to get my grain crushed. Now, I crush my own grain, and that's another issue you need to look at with this system. If you're coming from brew in a bag where you use using a very fine crush and a lot of flour, you're gonna find you have troubles on the Brewzilla. It likes a coarser crush, not as broken up as much, not as much flour, and uses those beds then to help to filter. So on my mill, I run at a 1mm gap, which is fairly close to a credit card, which you see quite often thrown around as a good measurement if you're using your own, if you're using your own mill. If you're getting your grain milled by your brew shop, tell them you're using a Robo Brew or Brewzilla, or Grain Father or whatever, if that's what you're using, and so to mill it just a little bit coarser to allow for it. Your brew shop should know what they need to do, adjust for that sort of brew. Okay, so we'll go get that done. We'll come back when we're up the temp and we'll get this mash in. Okay, so we've hit our mashing temp. It's actually snuck up to 56 degrees, which is fine because that'll drop down. So we'll pop in the malt pipe. We'll take our handle out. Now we've put our centre tube in, put a little black cap on, and that will stop any grain from falling down there while we're putting it in. Now one thing that you'll see a lot of people suggesting with the Brewzilla, and this is as opposed to using that screen to help with the mash, is these fellas, rice hulls. And you'll see people say, a couple of handfuls of those into your mash, so it's good insurance. It does help. Won't add anything to your beer, no flavour, but it does, because it's so light, it just helps with the keep flow through the mash. So have our mash paddle, which conveniently just sits nicely in the on the clip on the side. And then we just add our grain. I usually put about half of it in first. And give it a good mix in. So depending on how big your grain bill is will depend on how easy this is to get done. So this is where the 3 to 1 and then adding the 4.5 comes into play. So that's all our grain bill for this fella. And just give that a good mix through. Make sure everything's nice and wet, same as you would with any sort of mash. Getting right down to the bottom. So that gets us a thickish mash without being crazy. I think we'll have no problem with this recirculating. So what we want to do now is let this sit for 10 minutes, just so this grain will all settle nicely before you turn the pump on. So I'm going to switch to auto. So pause it, switch on to auto, press play, and we're off. So I want my lid. Before we put the lid on, take our cap off and put the top screen on. Now this will help with recirculation, and we just sort of gently push that down so it just sits on top of the grain without actually like pressing on it and compacting it. Now we can put that pipe down. I don't know how much level this is going to show there, but so it's a bit above the water level. Pop our overflow cone on, and same thing, pushing down. And that's going to hatch, that's as far as it'll go, so I won't go anymore. So what that will do, when we put the pump on, if we don't get a nice easy recirculation, it will flow back through there and keep water or wart in the bottom so our elements don't overheat and our sensor doesn't go dry. So that's a safety measure, and hopefully we won't need to use it. But that's her for now. So just pop that lid on. And I said we'll come back in 10 minutes and we'll put the pump on. Rightio, so we're rising up now to our next step. We've had the protein rest. We're basically going to our mash temp. So we're ready to recirculate. We've had 10-minute rest, and we use this arm with the hose, which goes in here. Cam lock fitting on the top. Fits in, just locks in place, and the hose just sits in on inside. You can cut this down and adjust if you want and use a sprayer or different nozzles, but I just let it run back in. And we hit the pump switch, which is down here on the side we saw earlier. Turn it on. It's on full bore at the moment, and you get quite a high flow, so you want to slow that down initially and let it run for a bit and keep an eye on it and see how that goes. So you can see the flow there. It's reasonably quick. I've got that sitting, it's hard to tell, it's sitting on the little lug on the top plate. That water's circulating around, so that will go down and work its way through the grain bed. And we're looking that it doesn't come climbing up on this middle pipe and come up and overflow. If it does, then we need to adjust the flow. But that seems to be alright at the moment. So we'll let that go now. We're underway. We're now 3 minutes into, you see step 2 flashing there. And it's already at 61 degrees, so you come up pretty quickly. Again, because that's both elements going. You can turn that down if you want, and it will take longer, but I'm gonna stick with that. Actually, I might just flip the 500 off, just to with a little bit more control. Some people do like to run just the 500 when they're mashing, and that's fine if you're just holding the temperature, but while you're actually ramping, I prefer to at least have a bit more power under there. But as you can see, it happens fairly quickly, so we'll let that do its thing now, and that's going to run through each different step, and we'll basically come back now and have a look when we're ready to sparge. Okay, so we've hit the end of the mash cycles. So turn off the pump and put both elements back on. And we now need to go to the sparge. Now we managed to get through that cycle, just had to throttle it back just a little bit on the pump. So you do need to sort of keep an eye on that as you're going, just in case you need to adjust it. but we didn't need to do any additional stirring or anything to keep us going, which is good. Okay, so we need to get this malt pipe out, so put the handle back in, and we'll lift the malt pipe out, and as I chatted earlier, there's the little feet on the bottom of the pipe. They will sit on the wire cage that's around the top, so we need to lift and just twist about a quarter of a turn and then set it on. Just like so, make sure she's steady. Okay, that's draining nice and slow, which is what we want. And I've got the remaining sparge water here in a pot that I've heated up. I'm not sure exactly what it's at, but I've found that it doesn't particularly matter what temperature it's at. I've used the correct amount of water, the correct heat. I've used straight tap water, cold, and everywhere, sort of everywhere in between, and it all seems to work. But ideally, 72 degree mash out, you're looking to bring up to about 75 degrees during the sparge in the grain bed. So ideally you'd be sparging with about 78, 80 degree water if you can. Which isn't always, it's not always that easy to do, depending on your setup. Yeah, some people will run an urn, lovely sparge water on, or I've just done it on the, put a 19 litre stock pot, I just stuck on the stove. It's only sitting about 55 degrees, it will do. Well, some people actually keep the whole sparge water up, basically fill the Brewzilla, bring it up to about 85 degrees, drain off the sparge water into a pot or an esky and set it aside, and then mash in once the Brewzilla's gone back down to that original mash temp. Doesn't really matter, up to yourself which way you want to do it. As I said, simply just using tap water will get the job done. So you don't need to worry too much about it. So this is draining nice and slow, it's actually very slow, which isn't a bad thing. It's ideal to have it running slow, and we sort of put the sparge in just bit by bit and just slowly allow it to flush through. And ideally adding, same as you would with a freebie. Again, coming from brewing a bag, you're not really using the sparge step. It's basically adding our sparge water in at the same pace as it's draining. Which is a bit difficult to slow, so I might just blow it up a little bit more. So the sparge water just flushes extra sugars out of the grain. And just helps to stop the final process. Again, as I said, ideally, you know, you should be bringing that temperature up to 75, 78 degrees to finish off, but I've not found any noticeable difference. Main thing is that you're just rinsing everything out so you're not losing anything. So I'll just continue doing this until we go through all the water. While that's happening, this is coming up to a boil with both elements on, so by the time I actually get this sparge, we'll be pretty close to a boil. We're up to 77 degrees at the moment, and the way this is going, I could well have a boil going before I even get the sparge finished. But I'll run with that at the moment, and we'll come back and have another look once we've got the boil happening and the sparge is done. Okay, so this is finished draining. Nothing coming out of it now. We'll pull him off. and this is now sitting on at 98 degrees. It's very close to hitting the boil. So just checking my volume. And I was meant to have 26.9. That's showing a fraction over 27. So the volume calculations are correct. So I'll pull this camera over, have a look as it just is coming to a boil. Okay, so it's just coming up. My temperatures seem to be up by about 4 degrees at a boil for some reason. It's just starting to boil now. It's on 99, so maybe it's adjusted itself. But we'll let that come to a boil in the hot break, which again, if you're coming out of any grain, you know that you're going to get a hot break. You need to watch that when it comes to a boil. And once that's done, we'll get some hops underway. Righto, so while that's coming to a boil, and I don't think the hot break's going to be too much of a problem. I've got enough space in there. Shouldn't be too much of an issue. But while it is, hops. Obviously you've got to add hops. Now, quite often you'll find with the Brewzilla and such things, they try to sell you one of these, a hop spider, and it sits inside while it's boiling. You put your hops in here. Now, I don't recommend these. I got one. This didn't come with my Brewzilla. I bought this quite a while back for use in my 50 litre kettle, and I used it for 3 batches and haven't used it ever since. Main reason being I wasn't getting the hop profiles that I was expecting or should have been getting with the hops I was using. And what I believe, and pretty confident, and I think a lot of other people have commented the same thing, this mesh is very, very fine, and it tends to it clogs up with this one's actually completely clogged up. I think last time I used, I didn't even bother trying to clean it properly. I just gave up, said that's it, I'm not using it anymore. But you see when it sits in the wort, the wort's all moving around the outside of it and not actually really moving on the inside. So I don't think there's enough interaction between the wort and the hops by using one. So I've just gone back to using every normal stuff. Either just a grain bag, which is pop in and hang over the edge, and yeah, just pop out and put my hop additions in as I go. Or I've got a bunch of these fellas, just single individual hop socks, and I'll put my hops in those and toss them in, and they just roll around in the boil, and you know, work wonderful. Get plenty of interaction and no drama. So that's my definite recommendation for hops. Use some bags. Now plenty of guys just say throw them in and the bottom plate will catch them. That's what it's there for. Well, I don't believe that the bottom plate is there to catch hops. It's there to stop crud in general from getting through to the bottom. But I don't think it's specifically designed to stop hops. So what you do get is that the hops, they are getting through, they get into the pump, and I've got videos where I've had to pull the pump apart not that long ago, and clean it out to get all the hop gunk out of it, because there was still stuff getting through, even with using bags and things, or just from the occasional brews where I had thrown them in loose. So now, yeah, I always use a bag of whatever kind it is, no questions asked. So that's my personal opinion on hops and how to put them in. Go whichever way you want, but I really strongly, suggest not using one of those if you don't. I don't see any reason why you'd need to, but that's it. So we'll I'm going to get hops into this, which obviously you don't really need to watch. 60-minute boil. The end of the boil, we'll come back and we'll cool. So next thing we'll have a look at, I'll grab my chiller out and we'll have a look at how it goes together, and then we'll have a look at it getting used. Hops are boiling away. In this case it's a 60-minute boil, hops at 60, there'll be some more going at 15 minutes, and then with 5 minutes left of the boil. So that brings us to the next point in the process, and that's cooling, chilling the wort. So when you get your Brewzilla, you'll get this included. Stainless steel immersion chiller. This coils are stainless, and this goes into the wort, and you pump water through it and it cools your wort down. There are alternative ways of doing it, but this is the most common and the simplest, and really how it's sort of intended to be used. I just use the garden tap most of the year and just pump water through in one end, goes out the other. I just run a hose back into the into my pool, or if the grass isn't growing, it goes on the grass, run onto the trees, or somewhere where it's useful. Try not to waste it. So this is how it turns up. So you need to get connections. Now there's several ways you can do it, and quite often you'll see the guys will use compression fittings on here with quick disconnects or whatever. Now I couldn't get compression fittings locally that would work, that nothing would ever seal, so I just topped it up a little bit of a simple fix. I've got them apart at the moment, so I interchange my hoses between the Robo and the Brewzilla and still. So what I've got is just a length of silicone hose. It's 12mm internal diameter. Then I've got it's about a metre length, and that just slips straight on the end of the chiller, and just with a simple worm drive bloody hose clamp, quick job, and she's on. Okay, nice and simple. And all I've done with that is I've just attached that to just a short length of garden hose with a hose fitting on the end. Just got a connector ready to go, and I've just joined that into the silicone just with a hose joiner in the middle, double-ended, 2 hose clamps. Good. I just bring in my garden hose, click it straight on the end of that, turn the tap on out the back, and I've got water. And the other end is exactly the same. Same thing. I just hook length of garden. I've got a length of garden hose, which I keep here in the brewery. I hook that to that, and it just runs out onto the yard or into the pool, ready to go. Nice and simple. So it's an easy way of doing it. It's not expensive. You've got to find some way of getting these things connected, and I've never tried it, but it would work. You could just put the garden hose straight onto this directly. But I find that the silicon's much more flexible, so it just gives me a little bit. It makes it a little bit easier to play with. You'll see when I've got this in the Brewzilla, I stick these two connections with the garden hose into a pot. I just the big BW pot I had earlier. I just set it nearby, set the hose in there. So if these connections leak, it stays in the pot, doesn't go all over the floor, doesn't make a mess, doesn't make it slippery and dangerous. So that's the chiller, and I will stick that into the boil with about 5 or 10 minutes to go. So it gets cleaned, because there's a little bit of crud on here from the last batch. I never clean it, you know, completely thoroughly. I don't worry that much about it. Get the bulk of the crud off. It goes in 10 minutes, gets cleaned up and sanitised, and there's still enough boil on to kill anything that comes off this. And then when I get to 0 minutes, flick off the heat, turn on the tap, and we start chilling. We'll run through the rest of this boil now, and I'll come back and we'll show you this going in, and see how quickly it knocks the temp off. Right, so it's about 10 minutes left. So I've added the second hop addition, which I just put into the bag. This is the beauty of the bag. You just need to have a big one. Just open him up, tip your hops in, close him back up. You can just hang on the handle, no problem. So put the chiller in and just sit straight in, no problem. And we'll just suspend off its two hooked ends, and it sits under the wart, no worries. Now when you first put it in, the boil will come off a little bit with the drop in temp, but that will come up pretty quickly. And gives us a quick look at our boil, and we're actually fraction over our target, so we're looking pretty good at the moment. That's the chiller in, so while that's finishing, I'll go and get the hose out and hook the hose up. Okay, timer's up. Power off, shut the burners off. I'm going to pull the hops out so they sort of drain a bit. Okay, I was looking for 22.9 litres post boil, and it's sitting just a fraction over 21 on the marker there, so we're pretty much bang on. Just going to be a matter now of where we are with actual gravities to compare our efficiency numbers. Okay, so hops are out, chiller's in. Now what I do while I'm cooling, pop the arm back in, run the pump, and sit it in there, start splashing around. That helps move the water around. There, which will help with the keep cooling, and will also help start aerating the wort. You can also put your mash paddle in and stir it if you want to, but that's starting to move around reasonably well now. and that temperature is already down to 66 degrees. Helps that the water's nice and cold this time of the year. So that will vary depending on what time of the year it is. But the big thing is getting that temperature below 70 degrees as quick as you can. That stops any of the utilisation of the hops. So that locks in your beer where you want it to be. If you wanted to do a whirlpool or a hop stand, you cut this at 80 degrees. Turn off the cooling, let it sit, put your whirlpool hops in, and just run your pump without the cooler running. So you're 15 or 20 minutes, and then continue on with the cooling. There's no whirlpool hops in this brew, so just continuing straight through with the chill. Right, that's 61 now. It's dropping nice and quick, so we'll leave that, and we'll come back when we've got the chill done. Okay, I'll cut the chiller off, turn the pump off. We're at 21 degrees. I'm going to turn this off. Now, at this point you could go to your fermenter, but what I find, particularly now, is that because we've had the pump running, the wort isn't as clear as it could be. So what I do now, obviously I'll get the chiller out. Now, okay, normally I'll just leave this sit here, put the lid on, but I've just changed to the new pressure fermenter, and it won't fit under the tap, so I'm just going to pull this up onto the brew table where I'll be able to transfer from. Pop my lid on and cover the hole so nothing gets in there, and I'll let this sit now for about 20 minutes just to let everything drop out, and then I'll transfer via the ball valve into the fermenter. So we'll come back and have a look at that when we're done. Righto, so this is sat now for, I don't know, around 20 minutes, I'm not sure exactly. So just going to grab a little bit off first, just to go into this yeast. Okay, so we'll pull that off. Now this has cleared a bit and the wood's settled a bit. There's still going to be a little bit of muck in there. Could have let this sit a little bit longer, but it's ready to go. You can transfer straight from via the pump, via the arm. It does tend to pull a little bit more gunk through, but you can do that if you want, and that will get everything out. This way you're going to leave about a litre under the tap. So up yourself which way you want to go. Because we were running that pump while we were cooling, this is reasonably aerated. A little bit extra going in here, and yeah, we're pretty confident we've got enough air to get us going with a good ferment. So that's it. All I'll do after this now is get this in the fridge, get it fermenting, and get this fella cleaned up. But that's another video. That's another job. But that's it. That's your brew day, your Brewzilla, start to finish. Hopefully I've covered everything you might need to know along the way. But as always, if you got any questions, any comments, stick them down the bottom. Go for it. may have missed something along the way that you need to know or think's important, say so. As always, patrons, cheers guys. Those who subscribe, thank you. If you haven't subscribed, again, hit the button down there in the corner, so you know when everything's happening, don't miss anything. But that's me, Little John. I'm done. That's your Brewzilla, brew day, all done. So, till I see you next time, we're brewing beer. Oh, just for interest, she's finished up at 10:44, which is 6 points above my calculated gravity. I was working on a 67% efficiency. I would dare say if I punch that number through, software is probably going to be closer to 70%. I think I'm bang on volume, so tastes like beer. So, listen, till I see you again, we're brewing beer, drinking beer, talking beer, good brewing.